Welcome to tonight's Zoom webinar. We are very glad that you joined us this evening. I'm Jennifer Graves, and I'm going to be your host and your moderator. Tonight's evening's talk we jokingly called How the Sausage is Made, because we wondered exactly how much everybody realizes exactly what it takes to make a season and a production. So tonight we're delighted to have both Robert Benedetti and Nicholas Ballas from the New Mexico Actors Lab to give us a peek behind the scenes. So both Benny and Nico have acted and directed and produced theater almost their entire lives. So we're very, very glad that they're going to show us a little bit about how it's done. And this year they've stepped into somewhat unknown territory as they take over a theater space in this time of COVID, which makes it a little bit different than what we're used to for producing theater. So now let me just reintroduce our speakers, Dr. Benedetti and Nicholas Ballas. So gentlemen, if you would first turn on your video and then your mic, I'm just going to turn over the talk to you. And thank you so very much for being with us this evening.
Thank you, Jennifer. And welcome. Hi, Benny, over there in the other box. Nice to see you. Can't see everybody else out there, but it's nice to be here.
We're going to split our talk between us, as in real life, between the areas of concern and responsibility of the artistic director, who is Nico, and the managing director, who is I. And this is a pairing of responsibilities that are at the heart of every regional repertory theater. The artistic director basically is in charge, as the name suggests, of all the artistic choices, the choices of plays and season, of casting, guest directors, everything that the audience sees once the curtain goes up. The managing director is does the shit work, all the nuts and bolts, budgeting, scheduling, rent, facilities, advertising, fundraising, and all of that. Leslie, if you could put up that first slide, the audience will be able to see the way we have actually broken things down when Nico and I split things up, because for the first 4 years, I basically did all of this myself. And then when we had grown, it just got to be too much. And by that time, Nico, who was one of the founders, along with Jonathan Richards and Barbara Hatch, stepped very naturally into the artistic director slot. There are things that, of course, we share a great deal. Our joint responsibilities include working with the rest of the staff to make the organization run well and to cultivate the relationship with the community and the other theaters in town. Change the slide, please, Leslie. Specifically, you see that the managing director does licensing, the payment of royalties, supervising and selecting the production personnel, house manager, box office manager, and so on. Although Nico does all of the creative personnel choices, maintaining the website, publicity campaigns, producing flyers and programs, maintaining the accounts and the payroll, and handling the money, and supervising the grant applications and general fundraising. All of that, of course, all of this is done in conjunction with our board of directors, who are people that have volunteered to hold the big picture and advise us on the matters of policy and direction of the theater as an organization. Next slide. And the artistic director, as I've said, works with the managing director on the budget and schedule, selects the plays. That's something Nico will speak about next. And we also have a program of winter readings that he is in charge of. Select and supervise all the creative personnel, and consult with the show directors to approve all of the casting and the design elements, and overseeing the preparation for each show. Okay. The way we start, Leslie, you can take the cards down. The way we start at the beginning of the year is I lay out a kind of financial parameter based on our historical experience of attendance and the way in which it's been growing every year. We have our own new theater, which is exactly twice as big as Teatro Paraguas, where we have been functioning for 4 years. So I figured out a budget based on about a 50% capacity as a kind of guesstimate, especially given the impact of the COVID pandemic. And on the basis of our usual 3-week run of 12 performances per show at a 50% capacity, we discover that we have about an $80,000 capacity possibility for box office revenue. And then after Nico had selected the plays and we knew what the casts were going to be like and who was equity and who wasn't, and once we figured our budgets and scenic costs and advertising money and all of that, we found out that we needed to spend $124,000 to do the season that we wanted to do, which meant that we were going to have about a $45,000 deficit. And so we undertook a fundraising campaign to raise grants and donations to cover that deficit. I'm happy to say that New Mexico Actors Lab has always made money, and we've been able to save up a war chest over the years, but we try not to go into it. We try to pay our way each year with a little bit of a surplus if we can. So we did manage this year to get donations from individuals of $42,000 between 2020 and the first part of 2021. Our wonderful season ticket holders, most of whom donated their $100 season tickets when the season had to be canceled. And because there were so many grants offered to help offset the impact of the COVID virus, we have been able to collect $47,000 in grants from the NEA, from the feds, from the Small Business Administration, from the state, from the county, from the city, and from the Santa Fe Community Foundation. We have a grant on all of those levels, and that's been enormously satisfying, although a huge pain in the ass for me, because juggling all of those grant proposals is not a lot of fun. So that laid out the parameters within which Nico could work, and he will now describe how he went about selecting the season.
Thank you, Benny. First, I want to just begin with a huge note of gratitude to Benny for the incredible amount of heavy lifting and not fun stuff that he's been doing. Indeed, it's a lot of work, and I am probably one of the luckiest ADs in the world to have not only somebody as skilled as Benny is on the other side of that equation, but also somebody who is as much fun to work with. And this goes back a while. For those of you who don't know, Benny and I met when he was my acting teacher at Cal Arts many decades ago. And when he and Joan retired to Santa Fe, it was an incredible stroke of fortune for me and for the theater community in general that he had chosen Santa Fe as the city of his retirement. And thus, New Mexico Actors Lab evolved out of his being here, and ultimately out of his relationship and friendship, not only with me, but some of the other fine actors that Benny mentioned before, who were already here in Santa Fe. Now, speaking of the actors who are here in town, this is very much at the core of our artistic mission. As the name suggests, New Mexico Actors Lab, the work really needs to be about the actor. And there are a lot of great plays out there. There's a tremendous amount of material to choose from. But if you don't have the actors to do it, and if there isn't a special connection between the actor and the work and the director and the work, then it doesn't really have the potency and vibrancy that we want our shows to have. And I use that, I take that mission very seriously and very deeply, as this is how we go about making the sausage, so to speak. And if the ingredients aren't there, you can't fake it. So what we have seen in the past, over the past numbers of years, is plays evolve that were important to Benny, that he really wanted to do, or that there were actors in town that he knew would be fabulous in the particular roles and also it began to evolve into actors and directors bringing projects to Actors Lab and saying, really love to do this. I have a passionate connection to this particular piece or that particular piece. And those are the plays that became our seasons historically. So I've used that same kind of metric for choosing plays as we move forward, as well as looking at what taking the temperature of the cultural climate in which we live. We had chosen some plays for our 2020 season that existed in a very specific idiom, politically, culturally, in this country. That has changed radically from 2020 to 2021. So has our season. So it's nice to know that we can be that nimble, and that there are people in our core community, our core company, who are capable of doing different shows, and we're doing that. There are some holdovers from season to season. I don't think it's letting too much out of the bag, since it was announced for last year's season that The Cradle Will Rock, for example, will continue from the 2020 lineup to the 2021 lineup. And that's a play that I hope Benny can talk about in a few moments, about his particular passion for and why it remains as relevant in 2021 as it was in 2020. And in fact, as it did decades ago when it first appeared on Broadway. And so we have the mission of the actor at the core of the artistic selection process. Aside from assessing who is in town, whom I can want to work with, who's bringing us in material that they want to do, I also try to get to as many productions as possible in town to see the actors, because we don't do auditions. Many companies do auditions, and quite a few others don't. And I find auditions to be, not only as an actor, but particularly as a producer, some of the most just arduous hours that I have spent sitting in chairs or watching actors artificially try to create the magic that is part of the experience that you see when they're in a show. And you just don't see it when they're auditioning. It's a rare actor who can get up and bring the entire mise en scène of a show into an audition piece. So we don't do that. However, that said, I really do like to go out and see who's in town and who is available to participate in our productions. And although we have used many of the same actors over and over again, I'm happy to say that we've continued to add actors from the community, and that we will continue to add actors from the community the more we see the people who are showing those special talents that we appreciate. So going backwards, the actors need to be there, the directors need to be there, there needs to be the material, the vehicles that can make them shine and that can really say something to audiences that needs to be said. So with all that in mind, there's a tremendous amount of research that goes into, on my end, what's available as far as shows, what's being done elsewhere. There are a number of regional theaters that I pay particular attention to. I have my own favorites. I think everybody does, on the East Coast, on the West Coast, elsewhere. And I like to see, well, what have they been doing? What are they planning on doing? What's worked for them? What hasn't worked for them? And the internet, of course, is a fabulous tool to be able to plug in and see what Steppenwolf is doing, see what's happening elsewhere in the country. And I've used that fairly extensively to come up with particular shows, and will continue to do that. The other thing that's really important for us is the suggestions, as I say, that our core company brings to me. And without those suggestions, I would just be working more in the abstract, and I'd rather not work in the abstract. I want to work in the real, in the moment with those other actors who have passion for particular pieces. So that, in a sense, gives us what the initial energy for the shows is. And then I have to figure out, how do these fit together in terms of a contiguous season? It's like creating a lineup in baseball or whatever. Who are we going to lead off with, and who's going to be hitting cleanup? And, what do we have for the various points along the way? And that gets to be kind of fun, because hopefully I'm working with the material that we need to be working with. Timing, of course, when are actors available, when are they not available, comes into the picture. But with Benny and I working on a lot of these decisions as far as the timing is concerned together, it becomes a little bit easier to figure out how that actual lineup goes. And then we get into the nitty gritty once the season starts of construction, design of sets, construction of sets, what the configuration of the theater. This is a whole new question for us to be pondering, because the lab, formerly the Adobe Rose and the Swan, of course, the lab is very, very movable. We can configure in any number of different ways. Certain plays configure naturally in certain orientations, and other will beg different orientations. So we get to figure out how that is going to factor into sometimes the way the season flows, because we don't want to be moving platforms and furniture all the time. So maybe we can minimize that by changing the lineups of the show. So there's some just straight up logistical stuff, as well as the artistic decisions that need to be made. What else is important here? Those are really the major issues, and keeping the lines of communication open, not only with Benny, the managing director, but also with the board of directors, is critically important, because we get a lot of information from them. We have some very talented people on our board of directors. I'm just really gratified to have incredible professional wisdom, energy, business acumen on that board, and to be able to draw from that and to feed off of it and see what we can do to create the best theater we possibly can in Santa Fe. I think that pretty much sums up where the artistic mission goes.
All right, then once once those choices have been made about the not only the title of the plays, but the sequence in which they're going to come and how they'll fit into the calendar, then I get to do all of the rights, to procure the rights to the plays. This sometimes requires some going to war. We had to fight tooth and nail to get Doll's House Part 2, for instance. Heisenberg. We've gotten a number of shows that were very hot, and we were very lucky to get them. One of the fights that we had to wage in order to do that was to get the licensing houses to separate Santa Fe from Albuquerque as a market. For instance, we fought for months to get Driving Miss Daisy because there was going to be a single performance of it at Popejoy Hall on a matinee in January, and they had blocked it out for the whole year for the whole area, which at that time included Santa Fe. Finally, when I got them to agree that Santa Fe and Albuquerque were separate markets, it was much easier for us to get the shows that we wanted to get. After the rights have been gotten, then the publicity campaign has to be designed and the artwork for the flyer and the posters and the advertising sponsorship with Pasatiempo and with Santa Fe Reporter and the various other outlets that we use to publicize, to get the word out. Although Santa Fe is very much a word of mouth town, the reason we run shows for 3 weeks is that we learned the hard way that you have very small houses on the first weekend, no matter how popular the show may be, because people are waiting to hear from their friends how the show is. Now, thank God, our shows have been consistently of very high quality. Of the 15 shows that we've done, I can't think of a one that I'm not really proud of. So as we have become more trustworthy, in fact, Shajuzinski in the Santa Fe Reporter called us the ever trustworthy New Mexico Actors Lab. People may not agree with the show's point of view or what it has to say, but everybody seems to agree that we do our work really well, and that's always been one of our highest priorities. As a result, our audience base has grown steadily year after year. The number of season tickets has grown, and that's something I'm especially proud of, because when we founded the Actors Lab, and by the way, it was Nico that chose the title of the company, I was working off of the model of the European Resident Repertory Theater. I grew up theatrically in the 50s and 60s when the American regional repertory theater movement was at its height. We were trying to build a network of regional resident theater companies like the Guthrie. And there were many of them started across the country. The Alliance Theater, the Dallas Theater Center, the Mummers Theater in Oklahoma, and so on. Some of them have survived and some have not. But in general, the repertory theater movement has not panned out. But because it's not, it's based on a European model, and the European theater, resident theaters, are heavily subsidized by their governments, and we do not have those government subsidies, and so many of our resident theaters have struggled terribly, and many have dried up and blown away. So we continue to function on the model of a resident theater, both in terms of our company, as Nico says. We believe that part of the mission of our theater is to attend to the growth and development and challenges of all of our artists, so that they are continuously growing and not just falling into typecasting, what is in the business called repertory rut. And we have also felt an obligation to our audience to sell a season, that is, to ask people to commit to us for a season of, in the beginning, just 3 plays. Then we went to 4 plays. And last year we were going to go to 5, and the COVID interrupted that. We couldn't continue to 5 this year because we didn't want to open before we were fairly certain that it was going to be safe to open. So we'll be back at 4 plays this year. But I'm almost certain that next year we'll go to 5, if not 6 plays. And the reason for having a season is because people commit to you as an organization, and they come to see plays that they might, on an individual basis, not normally come to. And as a result, through the variety of plays that you choose, you give your audience a variety of experiences that over a period of time elevates their taste, broadens their taste. So that sort of educational aesthetic component is part of the purpose of having the New Mexico Actors Lab. And it's why getting the old Adobe Rose Swan Theater is so perfect for us, because as Nico mentioned, the configurations that the theater is capable of enables us to create a stage audience environment that's the best as possible for each play that we do. Leslie, if you'll just run through those slides very briefly, here's the various configurations that the theater is capable of. This is a straight proscenium configuration. And then there's a full round configuration. And next, there's a 3/4 sort of thrust stage, and then a 3/4 round. And next, I guess that's all of them. Now, Cradle Will Rock is going to be in tennis court staging. There's somewhere here a picture of that, but that's where, there we are. This is going to be the configuration for the Cradle Will Rock. The show will start outside, and then the audience will enter into what is supposed to be a vacant theater. The show is done in tennis court staging based on actual tennis courts in the 16th century in France. The original theater of the Comédie Française was a tennis court. And we did a couple of tennis court shows at the Paraguas by putting a couple of rows of audience up on the stage. Doll's House Part 2 was in tennis court staging. It's an actor's space, and I like it because the audience sees itself in the background and is reminded that it is in a theater. Okay, you can take those down, Leslie. Okay, well, Cradle Will Rock it'll be my 4th production of it. When I was at Cal Arts, we used to take the graduating class and turn it into a little repertory company for its last semester and do 3 shows in rotating rep down in Los Angeles as a kind of showcase for the actors to be seen by agents and by the public, and to experience working under equity regulations, which we did. And Cradle Will Rock was done for that final semester repertory. And John Houseman was, whom some of you remember from Paper Chase, was the head of the drama department at USC at that time. He had been the founder and head of, well, Michel de Saint-Denis was the founder of Juilliard, but John Houseman ran it for many years. And then he moved out west and took over USC for a time. And we got to be friends. And I'd go down and visit him at his place in Malibu, and we'd sit out on his deck over the waves. And he told me the story of the opening night of Cradle of Rock. This was before he had written his autobiography. And I was so excited by the story of it that I said, John, I really want to recreate that whole event, not just the show, but the whole event that surrounded the opening when the WPA tried to prevent it from opening. And so I've now will have done it 4 times. It's a show that's very near and dear to my heart. And we have a terrific cast for it. It's an expensive show for us to do because we couldn't do it at Paragus because it has a cast of 14. And so it's a big undertaking for us. The royalties are high. It involves music and a choreographer and a vocal director and a musical director. I will surprise Nico by saying that Cradle is one of the 2 desert island plays that I, along with King Lear, but we're not going to do King Lear because ISC already did it. And I've done it 4 times myself. But there's one other play that I'm determined to do while I still have the energy to do it, and I hope that we can include it in the 2022 season, and that is Bertolt Brecht's Mother Courage, which would fit perfectly into the Lab Theater. So then comes the nitty daily grind of running the ticket sales system, overseeing the house management, and by the way, our hostess tonight, Jennifer Graves, is again going to be our house manager for the upcoming season, and we're delighted. And many members of the Theater Lovers Club have always volunteered as ushers, and we hope that continues, and it'll be even more fun in the new theater.
And you mentioned ticket sales. I think a shout out to Zoe Burke is important now because she handles our ticket sales and our PR. And that we're very fortunate to have her on the team as well.
Yes, it's the first time we've actually had a paid administrative assistant. We are getting into the big leagues here. So I think we've covered our end of things pretty well. Jennifer, are there some questions that have come in?
Well, thank you. And we have a question from Rosemary Zebart, who asks, Benny, how could you bear to give up the artistic side of play production for the drudgery of managing a production?
That's a question I sometimes ask myself. But it happened when I turned 80. And I realized that I just could not go on doing everything myself. And since I was heavily invested in the building of the company over a period of time and the kind of organization that it takes to do that, I chose to focus on the management and producing side. And Nico, as my partner from the beginning, was already basically in fact, in 2018, he was the co-artistic director. And so it was very natural for him because it was getting hard for me to keep up with what was going on in the business artistically and so on. Nico had many more feelers out than I did. And I must say that having been an academic administrator for 13 years as a chairman in 2 different places, including the Yale, and as dean at Cal Arts, and then having become a movie producer for 15 years, running Ted Danson's production company and producing 8 movies. I tell you, running our little theater ain't nothing compared to running a $20 million movie. And I actually enjoy the producing, I like to say, is being the traffic cop at the intersection of art and commerce. And it's very satisfying to find mechanisms and to find the wherewithal to realize, to make the creativity of other people possible. And I actually enjoy doing that stuff. It's a quirk, I know, but I am quirky that way.
Benny mentioned something that I think is important to note here, that there's a certain way of looking at the theater. He alluded to this, a certain way of looking at performance in general, and that I've been lucky enough, having worked with Benny as long as I have, and going back to having studied with him, and in fact, before I studied with him, having researched him before I decided to even go to Cal Arts, that there is a certain aesthetic, if you will, or a certain honesty that I have learned about performance from him that is critical to making the real work happen. And I don't think it's accidental, and I don't think it's easy necessarily for that to be transferred from one person to another, but I trust that vision that I've learned from him. I'm deeply appreciative of having learned it. And I think that it's helped us focus our company on, as I said before, the work itself and the actor's work. And in fact, going back to where I met Benny was through his book, The Actor at Work, which is a seminal text if you haven't already read it.
Well, I have a question for you, Nicholas.
Okay.
I'm wondering, it seems the general run of a play seems to be about 3 weeks. Is this something that's set in stone? Is this something that's flexible? How do you decide how long to run a play?
Well, since we have a season, we have to start, it's like moving furniture. You start with the big package first, and then you move the smaller stuff with the space that remains, or you fill the box with the smaller stuff. So a season has to take up a finite amount of time on your calendar, on our calendar. And then beyond that, we begin to look at, well, how do we, and this is an important part of our mission as well, make that space available to other local theater companies? Because we recognize the fortune, the profoundly good fortune that we had in being able to rescue that space. And I use that word rescue quite specifically because it was in imminent danger of being torn down, or at least gutted. And since we had that good fortune, we very much feel a need to, an obligation to share it with the community at large. And in fact, we will be doing that as we move forward. So we have X amount of time. How many shows do we want to do in that amount of time? Benny already addressed the 3-week necessity, since a 2-week turnaround is too short in this town. And frankly, I think that a month begins to kind of carve into what we can get accomplished within a finite 4, 5, or 6 month season, depending on how many shows that we're going to be doing. So 3 seems to be the sweet spot, as it were, right now.
Okay, terrific. I see that we've got a question from June Farrell. She's having a hard time opening up questions. If you could just unmute yourself, June, and let us know what your thoughts are.
I was wondering, given that you don't have auditions, how you work with like the School of the Arts, because I know numerous times you've had some excellent actors from the School of the Arts. And if you don't do auditions, how do you work with that school and determine who might fit a role?
Well,
Hi, June, and hi, George.
Hi there. Hi, everyone.
we have a spy. Barbara Hatch,
Yeah.
who's one of our core company members, is an instructor in the theater department there. And she is our source for information about who is up and coming and who is worth seeing over there. So we have eyes within those walls.
And when I was still teaching at Santa Fe University of Art and Design, which I did for 5 years, we got quite a few people out of that organization, and we do miss the demise. We do, it was an important source of talent, not only for actors but also for technicians and
Absolutely.
administrators. We miss that organization quite a bit.
Having an acting school in town is a huge lot. Not having one is a huge loss.
Yeah. You know, the thing about not having auditions, because I agree with Nico that if you think it's nervous making to audition as an actor, it's even worse for the director, because the director doesn't know crap about the play at that point, really. And he or she is actually flying blind. And you look at somebody in an audition and you try to wonder, what are they going to be like in 5 weeks in this particular role? And what you end up doing is trying to sense their essence, sense their soul, because you know that there's going to be a process of growth and an interaction between them and the role that they're going to inhabit. And you're trying to guess what effect the work is going to have on them. And so I would rather just sit down and try to get to know them in a social setting, and sense who they are and what their potentiality is, and imagine what that potentiality will be like under the influence of this particular working process and the demands of this particular role. That really is what you're trying to do in an audition anyway. You're not paying a lot of attention to the way they want to play the role, or the ideas they have about it. You're trying to sense who they are. So why not just get rid of the whole construct of the audition and get to know people? And we tend to cast people on the basis of how we know them as people.
I think bringing Paul Blott up a number of years ago from Albuquerque is a good example of that. Paul is someone whom Benny and I had both seen in other productions, and I'd worked with Paul in the past in Albuquerque, and just knowing what an easy person he was to work with was critical, because most of our plays are very intimate and very demanding, not only on the actors, but on the actor-director relationship. And having somebody who is extraordinarily skilled and a pain in the butt to work with just doesn't cut it. So Paul is a great example of somebody who is extremely talented, as well as being extremely easy to work with. And that kind of completes the cycle for anybody we're looking at in town, or Albuquerque for that matter.
Yeah, Paul and Nico did Ages of the Moon, the Sam Shepard play. And I think it's one of the best things that we did ever. And it set the attendance record for the theater, to the point that we had to actually extend it which was, I mean, it was just a fabulous show. And it was such a perfect event because Sam had just died in that year. We did it in the spirit of an homage, and Nico and Paul were just magic with that script.
Now, I'm trying to see if there are any other hands that are raised or any other questions we have. If somebody has a question, could they unmute themselves and go ahead? I have another one if nobody else has anything that they would.
I'll ask a question if I may.
You certainly may, Diane.
Benny, I've been fascinated with this idea of how you choose actors, the idea of your getting to know them to see what kind of effect the work is going to have on them. So besides the idea of your ascertaining who would be easy to work with, what other characteristics do you look for?
Well, there are some general characteristics that you want to see in an actor, although they manifest themselves differently in different people. So it's not so much behavior that you're looking for. It's something about the place where the behavior comes from. Are they driven by curiosity? Do they want? Is the working process of acting something that they're connected to as in terms of their development as people? Because you have a tremendous lowering of ego when a person's focus is outside of themselves on the work with a spirit of discovery. I want to discover what's in this material, and I want to discover what this material means to me and will do to me if I open myself to it. That's a quality that manifests itself differently in different people, but you can sense when it's there. So that's the main thing that I respond to. I don't care if they're polite or obsequious or if they seem to like me a lot. It's a potentiality that you're sensing for growth, because I think I don't think acting is self-expression. I think acting is self-expansion. That the best attitude for an actor to have about going into a role is, what is this going to do to me as a person? What kind of a person am I willing to become as a result of having done this role? Stanislavski spoke of the marriage of the actor and the character, and the child of that marriage is greater than the sum of its parts, if you will. There should be a level of personal transformation that results from the working process of the actor. And we try to pick plays that make that kind of demand. Nico is going to direct Lungs, which is a 2-person play this summer. And it's very, very demanding on an emotional level, and there's nowhere to hide because it's done on a bare stage with just 2 actors. So there is a level of exposure, of self-exposure, and in the act of self-exposure, you get the discovery of potentialities that the actor may not have even realized they had before they started work. I'm watching Jonathan Richards and Debrianna Mancini do the Heisenberg was a wonderful thing to watch in that way. So was Gin Game. Well, now I've lost my train of thought. But
I think just to extend on it very, very slightly is the courage aspect. If your actors are not courageous, if they're not brave enough to step over the edge, and there really is an edge, and every actor I know, every good actor I know feels it, where you just step over it and you're in free fall and you don't know what's going to come out of it, but you have to have actors who are willing to take that step, because if you're always up there on top playing it safe, you're never going to get where you need to go in the show. Certain shows are incredibly demanding. I think when I did No Man's Land, it was a similar kind of dynamic, and certainly the two walk-in players, there were RJ and Joey Beth. There was a lot of question about, well, who are they? What are they doing? And there was a whole, trust me, I think this will work. You need to jump out here and go this far with it. And they were both extraordinary in the roles because they did trust, and they jumped out without the chute and just did free fall to where they needed to go. And it was so much fun to watch.
So I have a question here from Barbara Burnett. She said, are you mentoring different directors in town?
Yeah, to some extent, we absolutely are. Barbara Hatch is somebody who has directed for us, and she will undoubtedly direct for us in the future. Jeff Ware, assistant directed on No Man's Land, and I didn't know Jeff very well. He had just moved here from New York, an extensive Broadway and off-Broadway and film and TV resume. And bringing Jeff in to work with me on No Man's Land was a terrific experience. So yeah, we will continue to do that. We have been doing it, and it's very much part of who we are becoming.
I have to admit that it's an aspect of our work that I'm glad we're starting to do, because I was selfish when I founded the lab with Nico and Jonathan and Barbara. I was needing a creative outlet for myself, and so I ended up directing the first 13 plays we did. But I knew that it wasn't healthy for that to go on, and besides, I was running out of gas. But because we do so few plays, relatively speaking, I mean, we've only been doing 4 play seasons. And this particular summer, 2021, Nico and I decided to do, I'll do 2 plays, he'll do 2 plays. The reason we did that is because we knew that we were going to have to be prepared to make adjustments on the fly, depending on the COVID situation. And it was just easier and more fruitful for us to keep the reins in our hands for this summer. But after the pandemic has passed, I think we'll be able to return to spreading the wealth a little bit. Plus, I hope that we end up able to do a 5 or even 6 show season in 2022, if the virus will allow. Because now we have our own theater, and we don't have to fit into anybody else's schedule, which is something that we really are looking forward to.
And Casey wants to know if there's going to be winter readings this time. If you're going to have winter readings in the winter or spring, play reading.
Well, we've been doing our Zoom productions as a kind of fill-in for the readings. And so we're going to be going from Zoom productions to there's going to be a poetry pop-up on St. Patrick's Day just coming up next week with some wonderful 19th and early 20th century Irish poets on Wednesday the 17th. There'll be another audio presentation. I'm working on a production with Leslie Harold Dillon, and that will be coming up in April. And then pretty much we're starting to get into production at that point. So there will be no other winter readings per se. And also we don't know that we can assemble yet even. So short answer, no.
That is.
But it is certainly our intention to continue the winter reading program. It serves us a very important function. It enables us to try out material that we're maybe a little unsure of. And about half of the plays that we do started out as winter readings. But there is another half that we might have done, but on the basis of the reading experience, we decided not to. For instance, there's a play by called Angels Fall by Lanford Wilson that is set in Santa Fe in a mission. And it has a Native American hero and a priest, an Irish priest that I did a wonderful reading of. And we tried to play out as a winter reading. And we decided finally, and the audience agreed, that it just wasn't up to snuff because Lanford Wilson didn't really know the essence of Santa Fe, and the play, even though it was set in Santa Fe, missed the mark. And so we gave up on doing it.
I have a question here for either one of you. Eric Fraser Hayes says, will there be a new normal at the theater? Will this pandemic period have any influence on future programming?
Well, Benny and I have been looking extensively, he in particular, I think, Benny, you are now a certified COVID monitor, or I'm not sure what the title is.
I am a certified COVID safety officer.
Safety officer, that's right. So everybody salute Benny for that. There we go. And because there may be any number of adjustments that we need to make staging wise and seating wise, and what the queue will look like for the audience as they're coming into any number of adjustments that will comprise, in answer to the question, the new normal. We're not sure what it will be, but it ain't likely that it's going to be the same as it ever was.
We have discussion after discussion about what to do if and what to do if that. And we haven't come, and of course then the unions have regulations that are changing all the time. The state Department of Health has regulations that are changing all the time. Yesterday, the CDC announced that vaccinated people and even some unvaccinated low-risk people could meet in small indoor groups without masks and without social distancing. That's a huge step forward. I would never have dreamt that at this point in time, such a loosening would have occurred. Biden's announcement that the vaccine supply will be adequate by the end of May. These are all really hopeful signs that we're going to be able to do what we had hoped to do. And we postpone our plan to opening all the way until August, exactly to give ourselves the best shot. The opera's going to open in July. There's another organization, I think the Symphony is doing something in July. The Botanical Gardens, Jennifer, is going to do something in July, right?
July, August.
You're doing a Shakespeare? What are you doing?
As You Like It.
As You Like It? So, yeah, so we're going to be the following month after all of those things have already opened. And now the state saying that people can go to the theater, and that's why we've budgeted for 50% capacity. because there's a possibility that that will be the limit that will be set at that time. Nevertheless, the fact that the Department of Health says that it's okay for, the lab has exactly the double seating capacity of Teatro Paraguas. As a result, our 50% capacity is 100% capacity at Paraguas. So our budgets have not been terribly impacted because of the size of our new theater. But we think that we're going to. It's one thing for people to know that it's legal for them to go to the theater. It's another thing for them to feel comfortable about going to the theater. And so we may well exceed the requirements of social distancing and mask wearing and hygiene and cleaning in order to ensure people who might be hesitant that they're going to be safe coming to us, as safe as possible.
I have one final question before we have to end this, which has been fabulous. Lynn Goodwin would like to know if there's any way you can leak to us what the season is going to be. We're all dying of curiosity.
Well, you know that Cradle of Rock is in there, and Benny let leaks something about one of the other shows, and you'll have to replay the Zoom to hear what that was. But you breathe with them. It's called Lungs. And then there are a couple other we're going to keep under our hat until next week. We're going to be announcing next week.
Terrific.
But Lynn is going to be at the theater. We do know this, Just Say It production in December. She is going to be our first rental. So I will leak that much that we're going to be thrilled to have Lynn coming in December with her show. So there we go.
Well, I have several people who are saying, thank you, Nico and Benny. You've been amazing, and we look forward to the coming season. We're so glad to have you here, and thank you for rescuing one of our premier theaters. We really appreciate that. So this has been a wonderful, wonderful discussion, and thank you for taking us into the weeds behind the theater. As the screen is saying, we're going to send out an announcement tomorrow about our upcoming Let's Talk Theater program. It's going to be a series on Uncle Vanya. And the first one we're going to be looking at is a wonderful, wonderful production of Vanya on 42nd Street that was filmed by Louis Malle and directed by Andre Gregory. And it's starring Julianne Moore and Wallace Shawn, and Leslie Harold Dillon is going to lead us in this discussion. So it's going to be very, very interesting. We hope you'll join us next month. And thank you all so much for being here tonight. And thank you again, Benny and Nicholas, and good night to all.